Absolutely, yeah, and that's where the value is. When you look at organisations, the value is in terms of people extracting from tacit information and extracting from tacit knowledge and then institutionalising it. And again, the McKinsey study that was done, I think 5 years ago, showed that the number of people in the US workforce, and I'm sure it's represented across exactly the same across the developed world, that the amount of tacit information and tacit knowledge that's required is increasing, and it's moving down the organisation. So whereas, and dealing with complexity is increasing, and that's moving down the organisation. So whereas in the past people had jobs that were mainly transactional, those transactional jobs have either been devolved into silicon and metal, i.e. they've been computerised and mechanised, or else they've been moved quite often into developing world areas. And that therefore the workforce generally, there's been an increase in people being required to deal with tacit information, with complexity and ambiguous information. And so therefore it means that the workforce is increasingly the demands on the workforce are increasingly that they can make decisions, make sense out of the information and data they get access to. So it's not just about having knowledge in your head, it's about knowing where to get information, building that into knowledge, making decisions on it, and then actions on the decision. So I think that's what's happening. Well, certainly that's what's happening.
So it's understanding the information and knowing how to act on it as well as being able to access it.
Absolutely, yeah. It's about sense making. And again, there's a very interesting researcher who's written a lot called Dave Snowden, who's an Englishman, or Welshman. He wouldn't want me calling him an Englishman. Welshman, worked for IBM for many years, who's developed models around the evolution from simple environments which are purely transactional into complex and complicated environments. And when you look where organisations work generally, certainly knowledge organisations, they work in complex and complicated environments. In those environments you can't have anything, Snowden says, you cannot have best practice. Best practice is where you can define everything and you can replicate it, and there is one best way to do things. Once you move into more complicated environments, you get a world where good practice occurs, or where emergent practice occurs, which is where innovation is about, and most knowledge-based organisations are working in emergent practice. And that has big implications for how people learn and how learning and development departments work.
Yeah, that's very interesting, especially the part about no best practice.
Yeah, actually, if you look at the at Snowden's framework, it's called, and I can never pronounce it because it's a Welsh word. It's called a Cynefin framework, Cynefin. And in this framework, he describes the move from simple to complex to complicated, and then to chaotic. And so when you look at organisations which are really at the leading edge of developing things, so if you think of organisations, particularly the sort of those working in internet type environments which are very, very dynamic, they're really working in sort of chaotic practice and trying to develop understanding about how you can turn that chaotic practice into emergent practice is really it's a major issue.